Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, June 10, 2025. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defends the deployment of hundreds of U.S. Marines to Los Angeles after protests turned violent, telling a House subcommittee it will cost $134 million to have the troops on the ground for 60 days. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass condemns the violence, but also the mass arrest by federal immigration authorities in her city that sparked the protests. President Donald Trump warns any potential protesters at this weekend's military parade in Washington, D.C. will be met with very big force. U.S. House debates a bill to overturn a few D.C. laws, including one concerning lack of cooperation with the feds on immigration, so-called sanctuary city status. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. removes the entire expert panel of vaccine advisors, saying they are all plagued with conflicts of interest. National Institutes of Health Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya questioned by senators on proposed deep cuts to NIH medical research grants. And the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, says the U.S. is no longer pursuing the goal of an independent Palestinian state. That and more coming up on Washington Today. Associated Press writes Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was met with sharp questions and criticism Tuesday by lawmakers who demanded details on his move to deploy troops to Los Angeles, and they expressed bipartisan frustration that Congress has not yet gotten a full defense budget from the Trump administration. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, Democrat from Connecticut, told Hegseth, "Your tenure as secretary has been marked by endless chaos." Others, including Republican leaders, warn that massive spending projects such as the president's desire for a $175 billion Golden Dome missile defense system will get broad congressional scrutiny. The troop deployment triggered several fiery exchanges that at times devolved into shouting matches as committee members and Hegseth yelled over one another. That was from Associated Press. Here's part of the hearing. Secretary Hegseth testifying before a House Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, questioned by Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat of California.
Mr. Secretary, I want to express my severe concern with the deployment of the National Guard in Los Angeles without consultation of the state of California. There have been photographs that have shown these troops sleeping on the floor and have not been provided fuel, food, or water by DOD. How long will this deployment last, and why were we unprepared to provide them basic necessities such as food and water?
The commanders and troops on the field are very well prepared, sir. They responded incredibly rapidly to a deteriorating situation with equipment and capabilities. We have made sure from the top down, as a Secretary of Defense who's been in a unit holding riot shields outside the White House during the chaos of the summer of 2020. I know what it's like to be immediately deployed into a situation like that. There are moments where you make do as best you can temporarily, but we are ensuring they're housed, fed, water capabilities in real time from my office, because I care that much about the California Guard and the Marines and the men and women who are supporting our ICE agents on the ground.
You should check
it's
with your
true
office.
Every day, and that's a disingenuous attack that misrepresents how much we care about our troops and what they're doing to defend ICE agents. I'm not going to take the fact that we don't care about the troops. Nobody cares more about the troops at the top than this secretary and the chairman and our department.
How long will the deployment last?
We stated very publicly that it's 60 days. Because we want to ensure that those rioters, looters, and thugs on the other side assaulting our police officers know that we're not going anywhere. We're here to maintain the peace on behalf of law enforcement officers in Los Angeles, which Gavin Newsom won't do.
What is the estimated cost of the deployment for the Guard and the Marines to L.A., and where's this funding coming from? Will it be coming from quality of life programs that affect our service members or our families? If you want to wait till I finish
before I hand it to
such as updates, housing, and barracks.
Before I hand it to Bryn, the insinuation that we're pulling money from housing and barracks in order to fund this is disingenuous and incorrect.
I'm just asking.
Bryn can give you the numbers, absolutely.
So the current estimated cost is $134 million, which is largely just TDY costs, travel, housing, food, et cetera.
Where's it coming from? That's the cost, but where's it coming from?
Out of their O&M accounts.
With the most recent deployment of the Marines, Mr. Secretary, what's the justification for using the military for civilian law enforcement purposes in L.A.? Why are you sending war fighters to cities to interact with civilians?
Every American citizen deserves to live in a community that's safe, and ICE agents need to be able to do their job. They're being attacked for doing their job, which is deporting illegal criminals That should happen in any city, Minneapolis or Los Angeles. And if they're attacked, that's lawless, and President Trump believes in law and order. So he has every authority, and he has done mobilizing National Guard or active duty troops under U.S. code to pronnect federal agents in their job, which is exactly what we're doing, and we're proud to do it. We're proud to do it.
10 U.S.C. of the U.S. Code 12406 as a legal basis that the president used cites 3 examples and circumstances for the Guard: invasion by a foreign nation, rebellion or dangerous rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, or the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Which authority is triggered here to justify the use?
I don't know. You just read it yourself, and people can listen themselves, but it sounds like all 3 to me. If you've got millions of illegals and you don't know where they're coming from, they're waving flags from foreign countries and assaulting police officers and law enforcement officers, that's the problem.
The laws of the United States?
No, the governor of California is unable to execute the laws of the United States.
The president, you said all
The
3
governor
apply.
of the California has failed to protect his people, along with the mayor of Los Angeles, and so President Trump has said he will protect our agents, and our Guard and Marines are proud to do it.
The law also says, Mr. Secretary, that the orders for these purposes shall be issued through governors of the states.
You and I both know that President Trump has all the authorities necessary, and thankfully he's willing to do it on behalf of the citizens of Los Angeles, on behalf of our ICE agents, and behalf of our country.
We've also pulled $1 billion for the border as well. So this just goes into the same fund, 134.
Congressman, what's the
134 million? I was asking Ms. McDonald.
Okay.
134 million goes on top of the billion that's been pulled for the
So
border.
the funding that was pulled for this year was largely in FSRM, and in this budget, we're actually looking to plus that funding back up to backfill that for our troops and for their families.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, questioning Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at an appropriations subcommittee. You also heard from Bryn McDonnell, acting Defense Department Chief Financial Officer. There was a third witness, General Dan Kane, Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We covered the hearing live on the C-SPAN networks. We've got the video in its entirety at cspan.org. Marine Corps Commandant General Eric Smith testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee today, and Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, asked him about the 700 Marines deployed to Los Angeles.
These Marines have no training in crowd control, do they?
Senator, the Marines that have deployed do have crowd control training.
Where did they do that crowd control?
They did that at their home station at 29 Palm, sir.
You said that they're trained for combat. They're being deployed for, in effect, law enforcement, aren't they?
So they're being deployed to support law enforcement.
But the task that they are being assigned to do is not central to their mission as Marines.
Senator, I would say that all Marines are trained in crowd control, embassy reinforcement, et cetera. So this is part of their training, sir.
All Marines are trained in crowd control?
So a standard Marine Expeditionary Unit before they deploy is trained, and this battalion was ready for that.
And what kinds of equipment do they have?
So they have shields and batons.
And do they have the kinds of arrest powers that police would have? Do they have the kinds of authorities that are necessary for crowd control?
So they do not have arrest authority. They are there to protect federal property and federal personnel.
Wouldn't you agree that there's the danger they will use the kind of lethal force that you've just described as their central mission to deliver, and that there could be injuries and deaths as a result?
Senator, I am not concerned. I have great faith in my Marines and their junior leaders and their more senior leaders to execute the lawful tasks that they're given.
Marine Corps Commandant General Eric Smith, questioned by Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, at today's Armed Services Committee hearing. There's been some speculation that President Trump might invoke the Insurrection Act. Associated Press writes the act authorizes the president to deploy military forces inside the United States to suppress rebellion or domestic violence or to enforce the law in certain situations. It is often referred to as the Insurrection Act of 1807, but the law is actually an amalgamation of different statutes enacted by Congress between 1792 and 1871. That was from an AP article. President Donald Trump was asked about this situation. today during a press conference in the White House Oval Office.
Will you invoke the Insurrection Act to deal with the situation in California?
If there's an insurrection, I would certainly invoke it. We'll see, but I can tell you last night was terrible. The night before that was terrible. We have, as you've seen, it was on most of your networks, people with big, heavy hammers pounding the concrete and pounding curbs, pounding it, breaking up, and handing these big chunks of concrete to people. And they were taking that concrete, going up on bridges and dropping it into the roof of a car. They were throwing it at our police. They were throwing it at our soldiers that are there. And we got it stopped, and we have them in custody right now. Look, if we didn't get involved, right now, Los Angeles would be burning, just like it was burning a number of months ago with all the houses that were lost. Los Angeles right now would be on fire, and we have it in great shape. I'm not playing around.
How will you determine whether or not there is an insurrection?
Well, you'll take a look at what's happening. I mean, I could tell you there were certain areas of Los Angeles that you could have called it an insurrection. It was terrible. But these are paid insurrectionists. These are paid troublemakers. They get money. And when you take a look at what they do, where they show up and everyone's saying, what's he doing? He's pounding the curbs. This one guy's pounding the curb, breaking the curb, and handing big pieces of granite. In some cases, it's granite and concrete to other people. And they're running out with it. And then we watch the other people, and they try and throw it into the face of the soldiers, throw it into the face of the police, and they hurt some people very badly. They go up on bridges, they drop it down on the cars as the cars are moving. They're not breaking the curb because they're doing a demolition service. They're breaking it to hand out to people as a weapon. It's bad stuff. I've never seen that before.
President Donald Trump today in the Oval Office with reporters. Final preparations are being made for the military parade in Washington, D.C. this Saturday, June 14th, for the Army's 250th anniversary. A Reuters article reads, officials said they are not currently expecting protests against federal immigration enforcement, similar to those in Los Angeles over the weekend. However, U.S. Secret Service Special Agent in charge, Matt McCool, said the Secret Service is tracking 9 possible demonstrations and is ready to respond if they turn violent. That was from a Reuters article. Matt McCool briefing reporters yesterday. Today, President Trump was asked about this.
President, any message to adversaries as the Army kicks off 250-year birthday celebration?
I just think it's amazing. We're going to have a fantastic June 14th parade, Flag Day. It's going to be an amazing day. We have tanks, we have planes, we have all sorts of things. And I think it's going to be great. We're going to celebrate our country for a change. You know, recently, as you know, with World War II, the victory of World War II, I called up France and they were celebrating the victory. Well, we helped them a lot, as you know. I don't have to get into that. But I called up other countries. They're all celebrating the victory. We're the only country that didn't celebrate the victory. And we're the one that won the war. Okay, if it wasn't for us, that war, you would be speaking German right now, okay? We won the war, and you might be speaking Japanese too. I mean, you might be speaking a combination of both. We won the war, and we're the only country that didn't celebrate it. And we're going to be celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but, you know, this is people that hate our country, but they will be met with very heavy force.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. Fast Company reports that June 14th is shaping up to be a big day with millions of Americans expected to take to the streets in an event dubbed No More Kings, which organizers have said will likely be the largest single-day turnout of the anti-Trump pro-democracy protest movement since President Donald Trump took office for a second term in January. Organizers expect 1,800 rallies will take place on Saturday for a nationwide day of defiance in every state and major city across the country except Washington, D.C., as to avoid clashes with the Army's 250th anniversary celebrations, which will be held that day in the nation's capital. That was from Fast Company. One more item about President Trump. He did travel to Fort Bragg, North Carolina today to talk about the Army's anniversary. And the New York Post writes that he announced that he will restore the names of Fort Robert E. Lee, and 6 other military bases honoring Confederate war leaders. He said, for a little breaking news, we are also going to be restoring the names to Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, Fort Rucker, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, and Fort Robert E. Lee. This is Washington Today. Back to Los Angeles. The L.A. Times writing that Governor Gavin Newsom called the deployment of Marines a blatant abuse of power and said the state would sue to challenge the move. Newsom's announcement concerning the Marines comes on the heels of a federal lawsuit the state filed Monday morning over the mobilization of the state's National Guard during the weekend's immigration protests. President Trump ordered the mobilization of an additional 2,000 California National Guard troops to L.A. on Monday night. Newsom criticized the action on X, calling it reckless. That was from L.A. Times article. Governor Newsom was on the Pod Save America podcast Monday talking about those extra National Guard troops.
The additional 2,000 National Guard men and women that President Trump now is redeploying are being taken away. It's the 79th Infantry. I know these folks well. You know these folks well. These are the folks. These are the National Guard men and women that have been out there protecting you here in Southern California during the fires, after the fires. We are now taking many of them off assignments on forest management, protecting communities, vulnerable communities against summer and wildfire season. We're removing them from task forces that we've created to deal with fentanyl interdiction. I have 394 National Guard men and women down at the border. I imagine they may even be pulled for this theatrical display of toughness by a president of the United States who's unhinged and has now crossed a red line in this country.
Governor Gavin Newsom, Democrat of California, on the Pod Save America podcast Monday night. He and the State Attorney General Rob Bonta had filed an emergency order with the courts trying to get a restraining order both on the deployment of the National Guard and the deployment of the Marines by the Trump administration. And the judge has turned them down, writes ABC News, but will be scheduling a hearing on this on Thursday. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, also a Democrat, held a news conference today in L.A. condemning the violence and blaming it on people not actually in support of immigrants, but instead looking to cause chaos in the streets. She pledged law enforcement has begun investigations and will hold those responsible. The mayor also put blame on President Trump for ICE raids that she says started all of this.
On Thursday of last week, Los Angeles was peaceful. There was nothing going on here that warranted the federal intervention that took place the very next day. If we want to look at the cause of what is happening here, I take it back to raids that took place on Friday and the uncertainty and the fear and the fact that families across the city are terrified that they don't know if they should go to work, they don't know if they should go to school. We have people that were detained. We don't even know the exact numbers of the people that were detained. We have people that have not had contact with legal representation, nor have they even had contact with their families. And so there is an awful lot of concern. When the administration started, they said that this was about crime. They were going to go after violent felons, drug dealers, and I don't know how that matches with the scenes that we saw of people in Home Depot running through the parking lot because they were afraid that they were going to get arrested. You are talking about people who are trying to survive day by day, which is what a day laborer is doing, and why they would be considered as part of a problem as opposed to contributing to our economy is very difficult for me to understand. We've also received reports of people who were here legally, who were showing up for their annual appointment at the immigration office and maybe even showing up with their family and getting detained. This is just absolutely unnecessary. People have asked me, what are the Marines going to do when they get here? That's a good question. I have no idea. The National Guard that are here now have one assignment, and that is to protect one building, which is the federal building downtown. The second building, which is the federal building on Westwood Boulevard. And as far as I know, nothing has happened in Westwood at all. So this was not needed. The idea that the administration would usurp the authority of our state government, take it away from our governor, Gavin Newsom, The governor knows that if we put a request in for the National Guard and it went to him, he would comply. There was never an issue there because we were never thinking about calling upon the National Guard.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, a Democrat, news conference today in L.A. In Washington on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, questioned at his own news conference about suggestions from both border czar Tom Homan and President Donald Trump this week that California Governor Gavin Newsom should be arrested for his handling of the protests.
The president said, possibly in jest, that if he were Tom Homan, he would arrest Gavin Newsom. Do you believe that Newsom should face consequences in a legal way?
Look, that's not my lane. I'm not going to give you legal analysis on whether Gavin Newsom should be arrested, but he ought to be tarred and feathered, I'll say that. I mean, look, he's standing in the way of the administration and the carrying out of federal law, right? He is applauding the bad guys and standing in the way of the good guys. He is trying to, he's a participant, an accomplice in our federal law enforcement agents being not just disrespected, but assaulted. This is a serious problem, and the governor is now filing a lawsuit against the president. What a joke. Do your job, man. That's what I tell Gavin Newsom. Do your job. Stop working on your rebranding and be a governor. Stand up for the rule of law. He's not doing that. So I don't know what the ultimate measure will be there, but I know that in the interim time, the President of the United States is showing real leadership, and we're not going to allow LA to burn. We've seen this movie before, right? This thing gets out of hand real quickly, especially in a big city like that. And if local and state officials are unwilling or unable to do their job, the President of the United States will do his, and we support that fully.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. ABC News reports that while most House Republicans are standing behind President Donald Trump's decision to deploy Marines and the National Guard to Los Angeles, one moderate Republican, David Valadao of California, issued a rare criticism of the administration's operation. I remain concerned about ongoing ICE operations throughout California and will continue my conversations with the administration, urging them to prioritize the removal of known criminals over the hardworking people who have lived peacefully in the valley for years, Valadao, who represents an agriculture-heavy district in Central California, wrote on social media. He said while he supports the right to peacefully protest, the violence and vandalism happening in Los Angeles is unacceptable, and I stand with our law enforcement officers working to protect people and regain control over the situation. Reporting from ABC News. House Speaker Mike Johnson also asked today at his news conference how much is too much when it comes to the president's actions.
Is there a red line for congressional Republicans regarding President Trump's use of executive authority to, say, deploy federal law enforcement or these 700 Marines? Is there a situation, say, if he invoked the Insurrection Act or directed federal law enforcement to arrest Governor Newsom, that would make Congress step in at the check?
Look, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals, but I've said very clearly, I was sitting next to the president at the White House yesterday when some of these questions were asked. He is fully within his authority right now to do what he is doing, and we have to maintain order. It's the number one job. Think of it, y'all. The number one job of government is to protect the citizenry from foreign threats and domestic threats, and federal law enforcement is doing their job. Those are the heroes, and we've got to protect them, and federal employees as well, and federal buildings and property. We're not going to let violent criminals destroy the property of U.S. taxpayers. President Trump has put his hand on the table and said, not on my watch, and we applaud that. So we're standing with him. Thank you.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference on Capitol Hill. Police, immigration, and Washington, D.C. are the subjects of bills on the House legislative agenda this week. Washingtonian Magazine writes this week the House representatives will debate and vote on 3 bills that, if they pass the Senate and are signed by the president, would repeal local D.C. laws. The bills would end non-citizen voting in D.C. elections, force D.C. to cooperate with federal immigration authorities, and reinstate practices shielding police from disciplinary action. First step today was to take up a resolution governing the rules for debate on these 3 bills. Congresswoman Erin Houchin, Republican of Indiana, member of the Rules Committee, managed the resolution on the House floor.
In 2022, Washington, D.C. enacted a dangerous law, the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act, D.C. Act 24-640, which allows non-citizens, including illegal immigrants, foreign agents, and diplomats, to vote in local elections. We should not allow foreign entities hostile to the United States to vote in our elections, period. We should not allow illegal immigrants to vote in our elections. This is a direct assault on the value of American citizenship, and it undermines the voices of lawful voters. Worse, it's part of a broader effort by the left to chip away at Congress's constitutional authority over our nation's capital. The Constitution is clear. Congress has the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever concerning Washington, D.C. And under the Home Rule Act, we have the duty to review and reject laws that threaten the integrity of our elections and our constitutional system. Even Mayor Bowser withheld her signature from those actions, and I want to thank her for that. Of all places, we must not let the nation's capital become a model for illegal voting. Additionally, this rule provides for H.R. 2096, the Protecting Our Nation's Capital Emergency Act. In 2023, the D.C. Council passed the so-called Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act, a bill that singles out the Metropolitan Police Department, making it the only union in the district stripped of its ability to collectively bargain on disciplinary matters. H.R. 2096 puts an end to this anti-police policy and restores fairness to the bargaining process for D.C.'s law enforcement officers. Finally, this rule also includes H.R. 2056, the District of Columbia Federal Immigration Compliance Act, which simply ensures that D.C. follows federal immigration law, because no city, especially not our capital, should get a free pass to ignore the laws of the land. In 2019, D.C. Mayor Bowser approved the Sanctuary Values Amendment Act of 2019, which, according to the mayor's office, quote, limits the district's cooperation with federal immigration agencies, including by complying with detainer requests for Immigration and Customs Enforcement absent a judicial warrant or order issued by a federal judge, or by providing to federal immigration agencies information about when or where someone will be released. This is ludicrous. In other words, D.C. will make it harder for ICE to detain dangerous criminals and otherwise impede their ability to do their jobs. Mr. Speaker, you can't make this stuff up.
Congresswoman Erin Houchin, Republican from Indiana, today on the House floor. Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat of Massachusetts, ranking member on the Rules Committee, spoke against the resolution governing the rules for debate on the three bills.
Three of the bills this week meddle in D.C.'s local governance. Not because there's some urgent crisis, but because Republicans want to score cheap political points and take power away from a local government they weren't elected to make decisions for. In fact, Republicans referred to the District of Columbia as, quote, property in last night's Rules Committee hearing. Property. I mean, who talks like that? I mean, I thought I was watching Gone with the Wind. This is so incredibly offensive. The people who live in D.C. are not your property. Their land is not your property. Their money is not yours. So keep your hands off it and keep your hands off them. Republicans, Mr. Speaker, are on a power trip. These bills either chase problems that don't exist or duplicate efforts already underway. That is not legislating. That's performative politics. And here's the real kicker. If my Republican colleagues were serious about public safety in D.C., as they claim, then the first thing they do is restore the $1 billion in cities' funding they slashed earlier this year. Now, I want to be clear, this is not federal money. We are literally talking about the city being able to spend their own money that D.C. residents have paid in taxes for the district.
Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, on the House floor. The resolution passed 211 to 206, which allowed those individual bills to be called up, debated, and voted on. And two of the bills, one dealing with the police accountability law and the other one dealing with non-citizens voting in local elections, did pass the House. The third bill will be brought up later this week. An article from Fox 5 in D.C. about these bills ends with this. In February, legislators from Utah and Tennessee introduced a bill to strip D.C. of its ability to govern itself. The bill is named after D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser, the Bowser Act, standing for Bringing Oversight to Washington and Safety to Every Resident. The bill would eliminate D.C. Home Rule Act of 1973 and place D.C. under the full control of Congress. Also an article today from NBC News, D.C. Congressional Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, a Democrat, 87 years old, said that she's going to run for re-election. When asked by NBC to respond to those who wonder whether she should seek another term, she brushed off critics. "I'm going to run," she said. "I don't know why anybody would even ask me." That from NBC News. They note that she turns 88 this week. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Story from NPR. Secretary of Health Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is removing all 17 members of a key advisory committee that helps craft vaccine policy and recommendations for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Kennedy made the announcement on Monday afternoon in a press release from the Department of Health and Human Services and an opinion piece published by the Wall Street Journal. In his role as head of HHS, Kennedy has the legal authority to replace members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, but the decision to scrap the entire committee flies in the face of precedent and has alarmed the public health and medical establishment. That was from the NPR article. Secretary Kennedy was asked about it today.
In terms of the changes to ACIP, this has been a long time coming. More than 2 decades ago, Congress investigated ACIP. The Government Oversight Committee found that, for example, that year, which was 2003, they gave one example that 4 out of the 5 people who added the rotavirus vaccine to the schedule had direct financial interest in that vaccine. One of those individuals voted the rotavirus onto the vaccine and sold his rotavirus vaccine that he had in development for $186 million. He said he won the lottery. That year, Congress said that 97% of the people on ACIP had undisclosed conflicts. So people have known about this for years. You know, probably the worst example of malevolent malpractice has been adding all of these new products to the schedule without doing pre-licensing safety studies. So in 1986, there were 11 vaccines on the schedule. Today, a compliant child must take between 69 and 92 vaccines to stay in school in some states. And not one of them has been safety tested in a pre-licensing placebo-controlled trial. And that is just malpractice. So the people who were in charge of that are now gone. And we're going to bring people onto the ACIP panel, not anti-vaxxers. We're bringing people on who are credentialed scientists, who are highly credentialed physicians, who are going to do evidence-based medicine, who are going to be objective, and who are going to follow the science and make critical public health determinations for our children based upon the best science.
Yes, go ahead. Can you explain how you're going to measure if these new restrictions on the staff waivers are working? And I just did want to follow up on ACIP. Will you get those new appointees in place before the June 25th meeting?
Yes.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. taking reporters' questions today. An event on a completely different subject. It was with Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins dealing with SNAP waivers, requests from states to be allowed to ban food stamp recipients from using the benefits to buy sugary drinks and snacks. But on that Vaccine Advisory Committee, the American Medical Association said that Secretary Kennedy's decision undermines trust and upends a transparent process that has saved countless lives. President of the Infectious Diseases Society of America called the allegation about integrity of the committee completely unfounded. Dr. Noel Brewer from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, was one of the advisory committee members let go. He was interviewed today by ABC News.
Have you ever, in your time on that panel, felt that people were voting in favor of products because of personal or business interests?
Absolutely not. There's been no evidence of that at all. There's not a single occasion when that's been the case, and anything that's been even vaguely sideways looking. A person has said, I'd rather not vote on this because there may be an appearance of a conflict of interest. But actual conflicts, no, I've seen nothing like it.
One more question. Your concerns now, or do you have concerns about who could now be appointed to take your place along with the other 16 members that sat beside you?
I will look with great interest at the news to find out who they're going to nominate. I've heard some names mentioned, but I will wait to see who actually ends up being nominated. I assume they'll have the same level of vaccine skepticism as the current secretary does, but it's hard to know, and I'm just hoping for the best. That's what I'm hoping for. And if things don't work out well, then there may be other alternatives. One of the biggest consequences of these events is that the confidence by healthcare providers has gone away. Healthcare providers used to look to ACIP to establish best recommendations based on evidence and expert advice. And that expertise has left the building. So they need to immediately rebuild that trust with healthcare providers. And if they don't, then perhaps the professional organizations will be able to find an alternative.
Dr. Noel Brewer from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, today on ABC News. He was one of the ACIP members, that Vaccine Advisory Committee, who was let go by the Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Story from CNN. National Institutes of Health Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya faced critical questions from both Republican and Democratic senators Tuesday as he sought to defend the Trump administration's sweeping plans to reorganize the agency and slash budgets for medical research. Senate Appropriations Chairwoman Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, swiftly criticized the current budget cuts and proposed changes, including a nearly 40% reduction to the National Institute of Aging spending and 40% overall cuts to the agency's institutes. Collins said, as a senator representing the oldest state in the nation, this is a particular concern. I know personally what it means to so many American families. Senator also said caps on indirect spending for universities are so poorly conceived and have harmed U.S. medical research. Some reporting from CNN. Here's part of the hearing. Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat from Wisconsin, is ranking Democrat on the Appropriations Subcommittee overseeing NIH, questioning Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya.
Your budget requests an $18 billion cut for NIH, and that's bad enough. But be honest with Congress and the American people. This forward funding scheme means that the cuts are even deeper. It means billions will effectively be put in escrow and won't actually be spent on research for a number of years to come. It means that you're effectively cutting research funding next year by another $7 billion on top of the $18 billion you propose. And it means that next year NIH would award a fraction of the grants it has historically. Your budget already proposes to award 15,000 fewer research grants next year. And this change alone, this forward funding, accounts for about 4,000 of those. While I think Congress will reject your budget request, it clearly shows the administration's intent. And you can cut $7 billion and dramatically reduce the number of NIH awards next year on your own, unless Congress steps in to stop that. So, Dr. Bhattacharya, I'm struggling to find a reason why NIH would implement this forward funding policy. How is this proposal anything but intentionally sabotaging biomedical research?
So, Senator, a couple of things. So one is regarding funding for this year. Congress allocated the money. My job is to make sure that the money goes to excellent research projects. My intention is that we will spend.
I'm asking about the forward funding proposal that disguises even deeper cuts in the NIH budget than the budget submission would suggest.
Yeah, so I just wanted to preface my answer to that because you asked that also. But regarding forward funding, that's a budget proposal.
But you don't deny that it reduces the amount that will be spent on biomedical research next year by an even deeper amount than the $18 billion, 40% cut already.
Right. So the way the forward funding works, right now we have multi-year projects that we fund.
Yes.
And forward funding says we will allocate the money for those multi-year projects this year rather than in the out years.
And so,
in principle, in the
if it's a 4-year project, 3 of the years will sit in an escrow account and not be spent next year. Again, further diminishing the amount that will be spent on biomedical research.
No, I think the thing is that in the long run, what it does is allow you to spend more money and have more flexibility for new research projects. That's because what it says.
That's
is that
funny
the budget,
math.
Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat from Wisconsin, questioning Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Director of National Institutes of Health, at today's hearing. Senator Katie Britt, Republican of Alabama, also asked about changes to NIH grants.
I have heard my colleagues today say and indicate that you want to give up on medical research. Is that true, yes or no?
No.
Right. They have said that you want to wipe out research. Is that true, yes or no?
No.
Okay, so let's have a productive conversation between the two of us right now. When we want NIH to remain the gold standard of research, we've got to make sure that the best idea wins, right?
Absolutely.
We've got to make sure that people have an opportunity to compete no matter where they came from, that we stop rewarding just legacy contracts, so to speak, and empower researchers and empower the research to go where it can save lives. Do you agree with that?
Entirely.
So how do we make sure that every dollar actually goes to discovery and not to institutional overhead? What ideas do you have?
I mean, the key thing there is that we have to make sure that the institutional overhead funds are essentially a part of a competition across universities.
Okay.
Right now, we have a system that guarantees that a very small number of universities are going to get all of the institutional support.
So how do we fix that?
Essentially, the key problem now is that we require the institution to have excellent researchers in order to get the institutional support.
Okay.
It's a vicious cycle because you only attract researchers if you have excellent researchers, if you have the institutional support that with the lab space and so on.
So we got to break that cycle.
Have to break that cycle.
How do you do that?
Well, I mean, there's lots of creative ways to do that. The IDEAS program that Senator Capito mentioned is one way to do that. There are other mechanisms to do that. I'd love to talk with and work with Congress on
Absolutely. I think we've got to create a competitive environment where the best idea wins so that the American people win. We've got to stop churning and churning and churning because it's what we've always done. This is our opportunity to make a dollar go further and to make it have a greater impact. I guess my question to you is if we introduce competition into this arena, which I think is a great idea and a concept that we should explore, if we introduce it into maybe the indirect cost equation, how would that actually bolster or do you think that would, break the system?
No, I think it would actually strengthen the system because it would get support to researchers that are in non-traditional places but have excellent ideas that have a much harder time getting support from the NIH. And I think that combats scientific groupthink, expands the base of scientific ideas, and it really addresses the critical roadblocks that we currently face.
Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Director of NIH, questioned by Senator Katie Britt, Republican of Alabama, at today's Appropriations Subcommittee hearing. Reuters writing about this hearing as this. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya told a U.S. Senate panel on Tuesday that he was hopeful President Donald Trump's administration would reach a settlement with universities that have had research grants suspended. The NIH has terminated 2,100 research grants, totaling about $9.5 billion and an additional $2.6 billion in contracts since President Trump took office January 20th. HUD Secretary Scott Turner testified today before a House Appropriations Subcommittee on Housing and Urban Development Department budget proposal for fiscal year 2026. A recent NPR article says that the budget plan would dramatically shrink the federal rental aid that helps keep millions of people housed. The White House called the current system of federal rental assistance dysfunctional and proposed essentially ending Section 8 and other housing voucher programs. Its plan calls for cutting rental aid by about 40% and sending that money to states, quote, to design their own rental assistance programs based on their unique needs and preferences. That was part of an NPR article. Here's part of today's hearing. Congressman Steve Womack, Republican of Arkansas, the subcommittee chair, questioning Secretary Scott Turner.
I appreciate your commitment to reforming our federal rental assistance programs. The current system, as you've already articulated, is rife with inefficiency. The administration's request proposes placing the major HUD rental assistance programs, tenant-based, project-based, public housing, into a single state rental assistance block grant program that you referenced in your opening. This is a substantial change to business as usual. Now, as we consider this proposal, I want to make sure that we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars while still meeting our obligation to help those most in need. I'd also note that an overhaul of these programs would need the work of the authorizing committee, that of financial services. I support reforms that promote work, that reduce dependency, and give state and local governments more control, but I want to ensure that we're not creating gaps that could lead to increased homelessness or hardship for vulnerable populations. So, Mr. Secretary, can you kind of walk us through the concept on how proposed block grant programs like this would maintain assistance to the approximate 10 million Americans currently served by these programs?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your question. As you stated, and I stated in my opening remarks, status quo is not good enough. And the way that we've been going about serving the American people from a HUD perspective is no longer good enough. And so with this new paradigm, it is indeed a paradigm shift, it's a culture shift. The goal here is not to serve less Americans. The goal here is to serve Americans better. And so to give states an opportunity to have skin in the game, to identify their unique needs, and then to be very deliberative about how they put the resources out as it pertains to rental assistance, as it pertains to taking care of the most vulnerable in our state. And there is a focus in this budget, Mr. Chairman, to take care of the elderly and those that are disabled. And when you look at HUD, HUD has had record funding over the past few years. In the last 8 years, HUD's budget went from $42 billion to $77 billion, and yet HUD lost focus of its most basic mission. We are only able currently to serve 1 out of 4 eligible families at HUD, and that's unacceptable when you have a $70 to $77 billion budget. And so this is a paradigm shift.
HUD Secretary Scott Turner, questioned by House Appropriations Subcommittee Chair Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas. Disaster aid for states was a topic today in the White House Oval Office. Spectrum News writes that President Donald Trump on Tuesday made clear he intends to eliminate the Federal Emergency Management Agency as it currently exists, but not until after the hurricane season that kicked off just over a week ago. The president revealed his plans for the agency tasked with leading the federal response to disasters around the country at a briefing with administration officials in the Oval Office about preparations for the hurricane and wildfire seasons just getting underway. Officials said the season is expected to be above normal for fires and higher than usual activity for hurricanes. That was from Spectrum News. Here's President Donald Trump.
We want to wean off of FEMA, and we want to bring it down to the state level. A little bit like education, we're moving it back to the states so the governors can handle it. That's why they're governors now. If they can't handle it, they shouldn't be governor. But these governors can handle it, and they'll work in conjunction with other governors. They'll give each other a hand. But the FEMA thing has not been a very successful experiment. Very, very expensive, and it doesn't get the job done. You saw what happened in North Carolina under the past administration. And when we got in, we did a great job for North Carolina, brought it back. But it was a disaster, FEMA. And it has not worked out well. It's extremely expensive. And again, when you have a tornado or a hurricane or you have a problem of any kind in a state, that's what you have governors for. They're supposed to fix those problems. And it's much more local, and they'll develop a system, and I think it'll be a great system. And also when it comes to forest fires.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. He was joined by the Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, who said that the current disaster relief fund has $13 billion, and he said that's projected to last through the current fiscal year, September 30th, for wildfire and hurricane season. E&E News has a story. The Trump administration has retreated from a plan to make federal disaster aid conditional on states helping with immigration enforcement, a new court document shows. The move marks a victory for Democratic-led states that sued to block an administration policy adopted in April that would block billions of dollars in disaster aid and other funding for states that don't cooperate with immigration authorities. Democratic states have won other court rulings to restore or release disaster aid. That was from E&E News. Wall Street today, the Dow up 105, NASDAQ up 123, and S&P up 32. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, writes Reuters, said he did not think that an independent Palestinian state remains a goal of U.S. foreign policy, according to an interview with Bloomberg News released on Tuesday. I don't think so, Huckabee said when asked if a Palestinian state remains a goal of U.S. policy. Asked whether Huckabee's remarks represented a change in U.S. policy, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce declined to comment, saying policy making was a matter for President Donald Trump and the White House. That was from the Reuters article, and here's part of the State Department briefing with the spokesperson.
Thank you. Just going back to Matt's question on Huckabee's comments, I know you said that the ambassador speaks for himself, but he was appointed by the president, and he does represent the U.S. government in Israel. So is a two-state solution a goal of the U.S. State Department currently?
You know, I'm not going to speak again. What I said to Matt, and what I'll keep saying, is I'm not going to parse the ambassador's remarks. That's not what I'm going to do here, and I'm also not going to speak about the nature of what people say that he was claiming or not claiming. I'm not going to have a speculative conversation about that right now. I would suggest that when it comes to the policy of the United States, that sits with President Donald Trump, and he's just he's like a 15-minute walk away from this building. Call them, and in fact, I think they would have an answer for you, I would think.
Okay,
but and then of course, the president sets the policy, but Secretary of State is in charge of foreign policy. So irrelevant of
yes,
what
I'm not,
ambassador.
Yes, I'm not going to begin a conversation speculating based on a statement Ambassador Huckabee may or may not have made. I would suggest when we think about the policy, yes, Secretary Rubio implements President Trump's vision for foreign policy. In speaking on that issue, with everything going on in this world, we are focused clearly on the nature of the things that are in front of us. And I would just suggest calling the White House to make a determination of the Trump policy, the Trump administration's approach in this regard. So Secretary Rubio doesn't make foreign policy. It's his vision and implementation of President Trump's point of view and President Trump's vision. And so that's what Secretary Rubio does, and obviously does it very well. Yes, sir.
What's the vision that he's implementing here, Tammy?
I'm not going to begin to speculate or go into this. I'm just not going to go here. Ladies, if you want to speak about the National Security Advisor, also call the White House.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce, part of her news conference today at the State Department in Washington, D.C. New York Times reports that the Israeli Foreign Ministry said on Tuesday that it would deport 4 activists who were detained aboard an aid ship bound for Gaza, including the environmental campaigner Greta Thunberg. Ms. Thunberg and another passenger were promptly flown out of Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv, and 2 more passengers were expected to be sent home later on Tuesday, according to the Israeli officials. Another 8 passengers from the ship refused to sign deportation documents and will be brought before an Israeli immigration tribunal to carry out their deportation. That from the New York Times. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy. From Washington and across the country. Coming up Wednesday morning, Mary McCord of Georgetown Law's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection will talk about the legal and constitutional authority to deploy the U.S. military. Then a discussion about deportation policies and the ongoing protests in Los Angeles. First with Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Jimenez, and later with New York Democratic Congressman Adriano Espaillat. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.